Hi, I'm Natalia Muñoz, the news director for Holyoke Media. I'm here with Iohann Vega, who is the director of media engagement for Holyoke Media, and with the school superintendent, Dr. Steven Zrike. Thank you, Dr. Zrike, for being with us today. As you're moving on by the end of June to your next position, and a new superintendent will be leading the schools, I wanted to ask you, because you were so involved with families and students, and I've said this everywhere I've ever been. It's like, I see you everywhere. I see you at football games, at meetings, at fun stuff, at dull stuff, at all hours, any day of the week. And a lot of it had to do be connecting with families. What is the value of connecting with families and students for a superintendent?
Yeah, I think it's always been important to me as an educator to, in whatever role I've had, to be to listen, to be able to connect with the people we serve, and ultimately we serve students above all, and then their families. And it's easy to get a little tone deaf about what's happening in schools and what your customer thinks about the quality of the experience if you don't connect with them in really meaningful ways. And I'm not just talking about your typical meeting, but it's sometimes going to a home. It's walking the neighborhoods, speaking to families at playgrounds, at community celebrations, which are where parents and students, and speaking to students at school and speaking to them, at their activities and events. And I think people feel the most comfortable there. So you're most likely to get the most genuine, heartfelt answer. Often the churches is another place that I found valuable to get people to speak. People, a lot of folks have had bad experiences in school, and whether they, as a parent, had a bad experience or a student had a negative experience. So, connecting with places outside of the school gives me value. Has always given me and members of our schools really valuable information about what we got to continue because it's working, what we need to stop, and what we need to start doing to better improve how we serve our constituents.
And in terms of how families and students have influenced you developing policies, would you say, is there a percentage that this is why I'm thinking this way now about something versus what I was thinking before? I'm thinking specifically, for instance, about there was a proposed search policy to randomly search students as they entered the high schools, search their bags and their pockets, to make sure that drugs weren't being entered into the schools or weapons. And there was so much pushback from students on that. Did that pushback inform your ultimate decision in any way?
Yeah, so I'll just to step back, independent of that decision, I think about 85 to 90% of decisions that I try to make or we try to make are influenced by constituents. It's not only students and families, it's also staff. I try to get input from teacher leaders. I try to get input from staff leaders, principals. We try to get input from elected officials as well. Sometimes you don't have the time to get as much input as you would like, but I will say that we try very hard to get the feedback from people before decisions are made. And I think that's one of the misnomers about receivership, at least how I have thought about receivership, is I know it feels, and the perception is that folks don't have the ability to have voice and influence. And that's not how I've approached the work. I hope that's how people remember my time here. I really believe in how you move a community forward is making sure they're part of the process. I don't think I think the way I've tried to lead in Holyoke is the same way I did in the prior community where I was a superintendent, where I thought it was critical that the community has influence on what happens in its schools. And it's the same way I'll enter Salem with as well as a new leader. Specifically around the search policy, there's no question that the voices of students had influence in in our decisions. Myself, Dr. Mahoney, there were students, there were school committee members that had opinions. There were teachers that had opinions. There were parents, and there were folks on both sides of it. But I think in the end, the decision was made because we felt that it was reflected. I think we felt like that having a search policy was not a best practice, but it also, more importantly, represented what we thought the majority of the community really felt was important as students came in to school, and how they and sort of the culture and the climate that exists at the high school. I will say to continue on this notion of student voice, one of my biggest regrets is that I did not have a student advisory group from the moment I started. I did communicate with students throughout my tenure, and I had opportunities to engage with students, and any student that asked to meet with me, I would meet with them. But I didn't have a formalized process until the last 2 years. And I have to say, I've learned so much from those formal monthly meetings, which came out of some of the equity work we were doing. And I plan to do that from day one in my new experience, because the value of the 1.5 hours every month that I spent, or 2 hours every month, it really is priceless in terms of everything else that I do in my work as a superintendent. It really changed a lot of my thinking, and not just my thinking, other leaders in the system's thinking about how we truly reflect school for what children want, not for what adults need.
What's interesting is how a superintendent evolves. You have evolved in your 5 years here in Holyoke, but also you have been a school leader in other places. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to a little bit, just like as this example, how has your thinking evolved about how a school leader does their work?
Yeah, I really need to think more. That's a really big question for me. I'm trying to find the space before I transition into a new role to really reflect on that, because I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot. I've been humbled by this work. I think a couple of things. I think what I just said about the role that students have. I've evolved a lot in thinking about formalized structures to have students at all levels of an organization, elementary, middle, and high school. How do you, I've thought a lot about, I believe that there have to be structures for students to be able to share their input and their voice. I've changed quite a bit about the importance of going to families, not expecting families to come to us. And so, the notion of going into community centers or events and churches, and I see the value of that so much more than I did when I first arrived. In concept I understood that, but I understand that more today. I think the other thing that I understand, I've come to, I've evolved in the notion of, when we talk about, I think I believed in the importance of having a diverse workforce, or at least I said it. I completely understand at a deeper level how important it is to have people that look like our kids, who are from the community, working in our schools. And I do think there needs to be more alternative pathways for those interested in working with kids who have profound impact, but may not have the traditional background. I didn't understand the value of paraprofessionals that I see now, and the need to get them to be teachers in our schools because of their connection to the community. Again, I think I would say those things, but I see it so much differently now, 5 years later in Holyoke. And the final thing I will say, and is something that I feel like the new receiver needs to focus on, is, while I really believe in supporting our educators and giving them the tools that they need to be successful, more than ever, the school system has to provide better professional development and training for staff, not just on academic content, which is important, and instructional content, but understanding the community, the context of Holyoke, understanding issues of race, class, implicit bias, and also social emotional mental health needs of young people. We do not have a strong enough professional learning system to be able to deliver for people who, anybody who works in a challenging school context like Holyoke needs to be supported to better serve our kids. And that's an area I think of much need and improvement.
When I listen to you and see in retrospective 5 years of hard work, I just thinking about the saying of see one, do one, teach one. Mm-hmm. And you have been a living example of that motto. And that brings me to the transition that is about to happen. We are still waiting for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to come up with the final decision of who is going to be your successor. And as you stated, when you announced in December that you will be stepping down as superintendent, that you would like to work together with this new person on giving a little bit of what is the work that has been done and how to continue it. So my question to you will be, what are the main points that you would like this new person to really know and understand in order to continue this work after all the learning that you had yourself by being with us for this 5 years in Holyoke?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, and I'll do my best to be succinct with that answer. I think first of all that the people who are to listen to people and connect with those people who are most committed and connected to the schools. There are a lot of people who have stayed with the district through the change, and many of them are very quiet. They do their work humbly, and they are so passionate about working in this community. Those are the voices. Sometimes it's hard to find them because there's a lot of other noise from people who don't have the best interest of our children or know our schools in the ways that the folks who do, the amazing passionate work for children. And that's at all levels of our organization. There's so much talent, and the people and ask kids and families who those people are, because they will tell you. I never ask, who don't you like? I always ask, tell me who has made the most profound difference. And I would tell the new receiver, ask those questions and hold on to those people, and listen to those people. I think secondly, I think it's important that the new receiver doesn't overturn some of the work that's begun around, an equity-driven agenda, an agenda that's focused on, access to more students at all different levels, more early childhood opportunities for students, improving the middle school experience. Not only do obviously I believe, and I'm biased, that it's the right work, but I also think that the fatigue will set in, and there's been so much change that started before my tenure and then has continued in terms of changing. And while 5 years seems like a long, in education, that's a long time for a school leader. It's for our folks, they can't I think it's hard for them to digest another change in focus and direction. And there's some really strong leaders throughout the system that we just need to go deeper with the work and not change course. That's I think really important. The other, I think, advice is, I've really struggled to understand mental health in ways, and I would say, and I feel like I think the new leader will need a crash course in trying to understand it. Especially in the youth of today, and understanding the Holyoke context as well. our students and families struggle on so many levels with issues that that is hard to comprehend unless you know, gets back to what I said before, unless you really try hard to connect with the actual families that the school system serves, not the people who don't have children in the schools, but have a lot to say about the schools. And then the final thing I would say is the Holyoke context is very unique. I've worked in a lot of other urban districts. And again, while I said it when I first arrived, I would reiterate it again. And, you know, I think a lot of leaders say, oh, you know, we need to make sure we tailor the solutions for improvement to the community we serve. It's so important in Holyoke that it doesn't become some, you know, turnaround blueprint. You know, it's not bought in a box. You just don't find that in a box. It has to be tailored to the community in which you serve. And I would encourage the receiver to really understand that, or to try to understand the context. And I'm going to do my part as much as I can to help him or her understand what the context is of the community that they're coming into.
What was your thesis in college? What was your doctoral thesis?
Yeah, none of it ever helped me prepare for this job. So I throw it out the window. No, it incidentally was in the principal's role in teacher retention, and the role and I studied some urban school districts, and it is a challenge in Holyoke. But I still believe that so much of teacher retention, or at least the right teachers to continue in the district, has to do with the leadership at each individual school. Which obviously the superintendent has a big part in selecting the right leaders to match the needs of the community and ensure that you've got the right teachers staying, attracted, and being retained in our schools.
Let's say you're describing to somebody where you work right now, currently. How do you describe the Holyoke Public School System, or Holyoke, to them as a school leader?
You know, I think it's an exhilarating, rewarding place. That's the first two words that come. It's humbling, and I'd first start with exhilarating, rewarding, then I'd say, but you're going to be humbled there. And I think your ego has to be checked at the door. Any ego that anybody has to be checked at the door, because it's unlike any system. It's a place where it's a small city that has the issues of a large city, and it's so much more magnified and intense because of the small scale of the city. But I've loved every day that I've come to work in the Holyoke Public Schools. My primary reason, I should say, for moving on is a little more balance in my life. It's been a very stressful, challenging, but incredibly rewarding. And I will be so much of a better leader, a person, a father, a husband, a colleague, because of my experience in Holyoke. And I hope, and I think the relationships of the relationships that I'm going to hold most dear and most sacred are the ones with the families who attend our school system, our students, and the staff. Like I've never encountered more amazing staff, but the public doesn't know who those people are. They just don't, because they don't pound their chest. I mean, Iohann, you may know, Natalia, you may know who some of those people are, but I think the general public has no idea the sacrifices and the commitment of some of the most amazing people I've ever met working in public education.
And finally, Dr. Zrike, when people think of you, when students today, family members, as the students grow up, enter adulthood, years on, what do you hope? How do you hope they will remember you when the image of you comes to their mind and say, "Yeah, I remember that guy. He was what?"
Well, I hope they would say, he was a relentless, obsessive person around providing a better experience for young people. That's what I hope they say. I don't expect them to say I made every right decision or I was perfect, but I want to be known as someone that relentlessly pursued what was we believed, or I believed, was right for young people, and providing them a first class educational experience.
I want to state and thank your work and your openness. I remember the first time that I got to see your interaction with the community. It was actually with the city council committee, and you were there and you answered every single question they had for you, and you brought up such a large perspective of that you knew the challenge that you had in front of you, and yet you had no idea how many things were about to start to happen, right? And it's been a learning experience for all of us, and I think as a leader, you have shown the opportunities for many to grow, and this receivership has been a really good opportunity for that improvement to happen. And even with this situation happening at the very end of your tenure, being in this isolation and still managing and still being here, even physically, still being here in Holyoke, doing all possible work to make sure that the students get the benefits of the best possible education they can get.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I won't be a stranger to the community. I've also made a promise that I'll come back when the graduation happens. But I'll be rooting for Holyoke and to be successful. And I'm optimistic, and I'm looking forward. I think there'll be an announcement very soon. In fact, I know there'll be an announcement very soon. And I'm looking forward to working with the new person to be able to ensure that some of the important work continues, and that our kids get what they need, as we move into what's going to be a very challenging summer and opening of school in the fall.
Well, as a last note, also throwing flowers to you. I think Dr. Zrike, you're extraordinary person and school leader. I think that being a receiver automatically sets you up to be disliked, and then so much of the work has to be people being open to just accepting you, and that you're really real and authentic and committed to the work. But it's just the system in which you're working that just makes it, that's like the first obstacle you face, and that stays with you among some groups for the duration, that have stayed with you for the duration of your tenure. But I know, because I've spoken with families, how much they value you and your connection with them, that it's been real and important to them, and it's giving them a hope, and the hope is very tangible. If somebody feels hopeful that their child is going to be treated well in the school system, and that there's somebody way at the top one is looking out to make it a fair experience for everybody, that's a transformative experience, not just for the student, but also for the families. So
well, I appreciate
thank you.
That. Thank you. That means a lot. And that's what we try to do. So I appreciate you saying that. And I just regret, I have a lot of emotions right now, because I want to see people before I leave. And it's very hard when I drive to Holyoke every morning to think that, like, I may not be able, well, I know I'm not going to get to see school in session, but I don't think I'm going to necessarily be able to see people who have, who have worked so hard with me and for me and alongside me, both students, families, and educators, and not to have the opportunity to see them in person. That's I am personally struggling with that right now, and I had no idea, but it's going to be, it's hard for me to have these conversations, because it's not the way I ever wanted to step away from a community where, there is a tremendous amount of emotion that I feel, and affection for so many people there.